Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Just to introduce myself, I'm Mark Huxley, and I'm going to be leading us through today's Knowledge Miles lecture, part of the 695th Lord Mayor's lecture series. And today's topic, I won't read it to you because I'm sure you can read it yourself on the screen. I will properly introduce our speaker, Dr. Ian Stone, in a moment, and he's going to speak for about 20 minutes, after which we've got lots of time for questions. So please keep them coming in. When you do ask questions, please no hands up or anything like that, because we just will not be able to see it. You should see top right of the box, a little call out box with a question mark in it, which is the question asking box. If you can put them in there, I'll keep an eye on that and I'll moderate the questions when we get through. If we get too many questions for the session, which is often the case, have no fear. We'll send the questions on to Ian, and if he so wishes, he can connect with you directly and answer them for you. I'm sure you're aware the session is being recorded, and it will add to the now growing list of videos that are sitting on a dedicated YouTube channel for the lecture series. So I think that's all the parish notice done. We're not expecting any fire alarms. If they are, you'll find your own exits. Definitely not anything we can help you with. So really, no more than to welcome Ian to the group and thank you, Ian, for coming to join us. So a little pet, or a little bit of a kind of small CV of Ian. He obtained his PhD in history from King's College, London. Subsequently been a junior research fellow at the Institute of Historical Research, visiting research fellow at King's College, London, and now a resident scholar at Dartmouth College, New Hampshire, in the US. Ian's taught undergraduate classes in the history of London for more than 10 years and has published widely on the city's history in a variety of academic, non-academic fora, whether that's articles, chapters, blogs, and much more. He published his first book last year, A History of the Worshipful Company of Masons, and is under contract to write two more, one of which will be published in the Oxford Medieval Text series. So, and I'm really pleased to hear that Ian's great passion, when he's not got his head in a book somewhere doing his academia, he loves his cricket. So I'm sure we will talk about that another day, Ian. But no more to be said from me, so I should pass over to you, and hopefully I'll see you back here in about 20 minutes for lots of questions.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome to today's lecture, everybody, on the history of the Leathersellers Technical College in South London. Well, in the first half of the 19th century, London's livery companies had lost what remained of their rights to direct their trades and crafts. By 1856, they no longer controlled and administered apprenticeships. They no longer acted as sole gatekeepers to the civic freedom, and no longer could they prevent unfree businessmen from working in the City of London. In truth, their position had been eroded over the course of the two preceding centuries, and these legal changes simply codified what was already a social and economic reality. What now was the point of the companies at all? Had they not morphed into self-serving dining clubs, paying themselves handsome allowances and fees, and exclusively benefiting from their charitable trusts? Indeed, was it not also time for the City of London Corporation, with its obscure customs, oligarchic system of government, and anachronistic franchise, to be reformed root and branch? The middle decades of the 19th century were filled with cries such as these from reformers who wanted to subsume the corporation into a reformed municipal authority, and even to appropriate the company's revenues and put them to public use. In the face of this sustained attack, which even included the establishment of royal commissions in the 1830s, 50s, and 80s, the corporation and companies enacted modest and incremental reforms, but it was clear that they had to go much further to ensure their survival. The most obvious field in which the corporation and companies could make a difference was in technical training. Contemporary Britain had industrialized, but there was no national system for technical education at all. What did exist was a feeling that Britain was losing its competitive edge as Germany and America industrialized rapidly, and that better technical education was therefore a pressing need. In 1875, for example, William Gladstone gave a fiery speech in which he exhorted the companies to do what they could to, quote, improve the knowledge of the British artist and workman and enable him to hold his position in the markets of the world. Well, some companies were already focused in their philanthropy on education related to their historic trades. In 1874, for instance, the cloth workers donated £10,000 to establish a department of textile industries at a newly created Yorkshire College of Science in Leeds. Hitherto, there had been no tradition of the companies working together, but in 1878, the corporation and 16 livery companies came together to set up the City and Guilds of London Institute for the Advancement of Technical Education, which we can see in this slide here, headquartered for a very long time at Gresham College. And this was to provide a national system for technical and scientific education and examination. Two leathery companies, the Leathersellers and the Cordwainers, had been involved in setting up the City and Guild, and both companies wanted to do more for education in the leather industry in particular. Together with two trade associations, these companies worked through the City and Guilds to establish a leather trade school in Bethnal Green Road in 1887. Other companies took similar steps. To take just one example, the Carpenters Company, together with the Tilers and Bricklayers, instituted the Trades Training School in 1893 to teach building skills to young men. At the same time, there were also moves across the country to set up polytechnics. The South London Polytechnic Commission, for example, raised enough funds to found polytechnics at Borough, as we can see here, and at Battersea in 1891. The governors at Borough were keen to offer classes in leather manufacture. They were, after all, located less than a mile away from Bermondsey, then home to London's leather industry. In the middle of the 19th century, 1/3 of all British leather was produced in that part of southeast London. Its importance had declined somewhat since, but Bermondsey remained a site of national industrial significance. Real ambitions, governors at Borough worked with the Herald Foundation, a charitable trust which owned two school buildings situated on Drummond Road in Bermondsey here on these maps, then in use for evening classes in science. Together, they drew up a plan to incorporate the buildings as a technical institute as part of the Polytechnic. In 1895, they approached a Leathersellers company for support, and within a couple of months, the company had agreed to provide £200 to sponsor a course of evening lectures in leather manufacture at the Herald Institute. Well, what a turnaround all of this represented. Previously, the corporation and the livery companies had done next to nothing to support technical education. Within the space of less than 20 years, they had established specialist trade schools in London, founded the City and Guilds Institute, and either directly supported the creation of polytechnics, or they had worked with colleges, as the Leathersellers had at Borough or as the Skinners had at Leeds, to sponsor education in their trades and industries. This was more than enough to silence their critics, and the Leathersellers Company had been involved in all three of those strands. The initial series of lectures was successful for the Borough Polytechnic to ask the Leathersellers Company, the London County Council, hereafter LCC, and the Herald Foundation for further support. The company responded by providing £6 to establish what was called the Worshipful Company of Leathersellers Technical Department of Herald Institute, which was managed by a committee manned with representatives from all these organisations. From 1898, when the Institute discontinued other classes to focus exclusively on leather, until 1909, the Herald Institute was a specialist leather trade school operating as a branch of the Borough Polytechnic, and we can see an image of it here in this slide. Well, the venture at Herald enjoyed mixed fortunes. One journal report counted the college as among 3 or 4 tanning schools in Europe, and student enrolments could be higher, 75 in one year, 67 in another, 80 in 1907. The students often did well in national exams as well. In 1908, they picked up 10 of the 12 medals awarded nationally by the City and Guilds in leather tanning, dressing, and dyeing. Certainly, the Leathersellers Company praised the success of the Herald Institute and the general benefit the teaching given had been found to exert on the industry. However, regular annual grants of £500 each from the company and the LCC, along with frequent additional support from the Leathersellers, the college was under almost continuous financial stress. Twice, the secretary of the institute paid the staff's wages from his own pocket. Part of the reason for this is that in many years, student enrolments were simply not high enough. But the problems went deeper than that. Two reports criticised the institute's lax administration, unconcentrated business affairs, loose control of stock, and overall serious disorganisation. In 1903, a fire broke out in a disused, mouse-infested cistern under the office, which caused significant damage and destroyed many records. In 1905, the auditors couldn't audit the institute's accounts because the secretary was months behind when it came to completing the books. The committee which ran Herald's Institute often clashed with the governors of the Borough Polytechnic over as well. The cramped space at Herald's over two sites, as well as the outdated buildings and equipment, was a handicap. By 1907, the company was after bigger and better facilities, more centrally located. And 1 year later, it acquired a freehold site on Tower Bridge Road, on which to build its own college. Building work was soon underway, and the Leathersellers ended and at Bethnal Green to concentrate on this. On Friday, the 1st of October 1909, Sir George Wyatt Truscott, the Lord Mayor of London, opened the new Leathersellers Technical College, which we can see in this photo here. The building, which had cost the company just under £20,000 and which measured some 40,000 square feet, was probably the largest leather trades college in the world. Certainly it was the best equipped, and these images in this slide show some of the facilities there. It had separate heavy and light leather tanneries, as well as a dye house. There was both a machine shop and a currier shop where students could learn how to finish leather, in addition to a lecture theatre, laboratories, a library, and in the college's early years, there was much to celebrate. Inspectors from the LCC and the Board of Education praised the facilities, the curriculum, the staff, and the college's research work, especially on investigating anthrax in cattle hides. The Leathersellers Company established scholarships to support students from Colf's Grammar, a school in Lewisham which it sponsored. The United Tanners Federation, a trade body representing heavy leather tanners, and Barrow, Hepburn and Gale, one of the largest leather businesses in the country, also provided money for scholarships, as did two generous individuals whose names are on this slide here. The Worshipful Company of Curriers began to collect money annually to support the college's work too. In 1920, the Corium Club, a popular student association offering sports matches, dinners and even recreations. The college governors at one point held discussions with the University of London and Imperial College with a view to affiliating the college as a department within either institution. However, here too, there were also problems. Some clearly could not have been foreseen or helped. The Great War had a significant impact on student enrolments, and with leather being a material of critical wartime importance, Dr. James Gordon Parker, the college principal, the head of the department, was seconded to the War Office. As with other trade schools, the Leathersellers College offered classes for women, and we can see the advertisement on this slide here for the first time, and for soldiers who had been injured and thus discharged. But the number on these courses never made up for the loss of the regular intake. The economic slump which followed the war was key to Bermondsey, and tanneries reduced the number of students that they sent to college. Throughout this period, the industry continued to drift away from London as well, and heavy leather manufacture in particular left Bermondsey. Other problems, however, were within the college's power to tax. In 1914, the registrar misappropriated £442 of the college's funds. For the most part, student enrolment totals were only ever respectable, seldom impressive. As early as 1912, the Board of Education inspector had noted that the number of evening students, which at that time was 47, was in decline, that their attendance was unsatisfactory, and that while 400 young men aged between 15 and 20 who lived in Bermondsey worked in the leather industry, less than a dozen students of that age were attending evening classes. 10 years later, just 27 students enrolled for the evening lectures, and across the same period, the number of day students was broadly flat. Disappointing student enrollments, combined with higher costs thanks to inflation and increase in the tax burden, meant that the college struggled financially. The Leathersellers agreed to support the college with a grant of £500 a year, matched by the LCC. But in 4 years after the college's opening, the company had paid over £6,300, and that in addition to the £20,000 it had spent building and fitting out the college. In 1919, the Leathersellers found thousands of pounds to extend and to remodel the college to cope with what proved only to be a temporary post-war demobilisation-driven increase in student numbers. 2 years later, the company had to make 3 temporary advances in just totaling 1,150 just to keep the college going. By late 1926, in the minutes of the committees which ran the college, we begin to find entries like, should the college continue next year, and that the college's financial deficit was a matter of grave concern to the committee. Now, I have to be careful here. A man's reputation is on the line, and he has no right of reply. However, it's hard to escape the unfortunate conclusion that the biggest obstacle to the college's success was its principal. From the earliest days at the Herald Institute, Gordon Parker had developed a regrettable habit of submitting Pollyanna reports to the governors, which read more like press releases than honest. When concerns were raised, whether about student enrollments, the college's administration, financial position, or the quality of teaching on offer, Gordon Parker would usually blame facilities and equipment or find other excuses for the issues. In the early 1920s, the two main trade federations began to lose faith in the college and its principal, reducing or even withdrawing their financial support. By 1926, the head tanners associated themselves from the college. In response, the Leathersellers commissioned Rob Roberts, the government chemist, to chair an independent inquiry, and there's a picture of him from the portrait gallery. To speak as freely as possible, representatives of both trade federations insisted on giving their evidence anonymously. The transcripts of their submissions make for some reading. They described Gordon Parker as slipshod, inefficient, and incompetent. And on more than one occasion, the clerk was even directed not to take some of the evidence down in writing. To some extent, the clashes recorded at the inquiry were the result of different visions for the college. So Gordon Parker wanted it to become more of a scientific school, like the leather department at Leeds University, whereas others thought it should concentrate on training analysts and workers for the industry. Some in the trade welcomed overseas students to the college, while others thought that this simply gave foreigners the skills that they needed to outcompete British tanners when they got home. The most significant, though, was occasioned by the private research work done by Gordon Parker and, to a lesser extent, Mr. Lamb, and pictures of both of them here. Gordon Parker's private work had first raised concerns at the Heralds. At that time, an uneasy compromise was reached, which allowed him to continue his practice, but under certain conditions. But the issue came up again on occasions, most vehemently and for the final time in 1927. Now, as far as concerned, he could have earned more private sector. It had always been understood that he could top his income in this way. Besides, his private work in no way interfered with his responsibilities as principal. Were he to leave, the college would attract not nearly as many students, and his private practice actually benefited students as they could work on and with his samples and extracts. Others disagreed. They argued often that Gordon Parker and Lamb, again to a lesser extent, were not devoting enough time to their work at the colleges, or that they withheld their findings as consultants and researchers from the students. They also held that on a point of principle, if not law, quote, a member of staff in an institution supported by public funds should not carry out private work. Members of the Research Association feared that Parker was sharing their confidential information when he did consult non-members, while other tanners complained that Gordon Parker used his research findings, which he got through his position as principal, as a partner and director of a tannery in Bristol, thereby gaining an unfair commercial advantage. Well, when the inquiry reported, it upheld most of these accusations, concluding that Gordon Parker and Lamb had a divided allegiance to the college on the one hand and to private practice on the other, and that Gordon Parker had irreparably lost the confidence of, and as he was not carrying out his duties as envisaged, then his position should be placed under careful review. As we can see in these minutes here, Gordon Parker was, quote, afforded an opportunity of taking any step he might consider desirable. Well, he took the hint, and 3 days later he retired as principal. It was a sad end to his tenure at the college. Having been forbidden to take on private work, Lamb was appointed principal, a position he held until 1936, when he was succeeded by J.R. Lockie. Well, under their leadership, fortunes improved markedly. With the renewed confidence and subsequently financial support of the trade federations, the number of students increased, breaking all records, filling many. Even in 1933 and 4, despite an economic depression and the closure of many tanneries in Bermondsey, the students and produced some brilliant research. Well, Lamb established a coordination scheme through which students at the Cordwainers Technical College, the Smithfield Meat Institute, and the Leathersellers College could spend time studying at each institution. In 1933, with the position, and altogether the financial stress plagued the college disappears from the minutes and accounts. The Second World War was, of course, but there was an enormous demand to study there afterward. But what was the college's future? As is well known, the wartime coalition government had given considerable thought to post-war social reconstruction. And in 1945, a committee chaired by Lord Eustace Percy submitted a report on higher technical education. One of its many recommendations was to establish a limited number of technical colleges offering courses comparable to a university degree. The Attlee government was keen that every industry that wanted one should have its own national college, which would be funded by direct grant. Dr. Ernest Snow, who had been leather controller during the war, wanted the college to become the national college for the leather industry, as did the trade federations, and discussions were held with the Ministry of Education in 1947. The Leathersellers Company supported the move too, although they were determined not to lose their connections with the new college. In negotiations with the ministry then, it was agreed that the institution would be called the National Leathersellers College, and that the chair of its governing body would be either an assistant or a liveryman of the company. The first, and indeed only chairman of the Board of Governors, was George Odey MP, who was also chairman of Barrow, Hepburn and Gale, and fourth warden of the Leathersellers in 1965-6. And here we can see a picture of him, again from the National Portrait Gallery. The company granted the college a new lease on the premises for a peppercorn rent. On the 1st of September, the college officially became a national monotechnic, and thus began the final chapter in the history of religion in Bermondsey. The Leathersellers supported the college as well as funding prizes and a scholarship for an old Colfian as well. Another livery company, this time the Glovers, instituted a prize at the new college too. But an industry took a greater role in supporting the college financially. For example, when the college was extended, redecorated and modernised in 1954-5, and there are some images here of the new equipment and machinery that we can see, at a cost of some £91,000, an appeal to the industry raised, while the remainder came from the Ministry of Education. However, the college's future was soon in doubt again. The development of synthetics and rubbers had reduced demand for leather, and nationally, the industry was shrinking and consolidating. As we've seen, the tanneries and manufacturers had been departing Bermondsey since the late 19th century, but wartime bombing and high London property prices had accelerated that trend. We can see some newspaper reports here bemoaning the demise of the leather industry in Bermondsey. Although the number of days was usually good, there were 59 of them in 1954. Tanneries were sending barely any workers along to the evening classes, so they were discontinued at the college in 1958. By the mid-1960s, with reduced interest from British students, about half the student body was drawn from overseas. Well, we're never too far away from a review and a remodelling of technical education in the UK. And in 1963, there was one, the Robbins Report, recommended an immediate expansion in university provision. Consequently, 10 colleges of advanced technology became universities. It was at that time, for example, that Battersea College, the descendant of the Polytechnic Institute we saw earlier, became the University of Surrey. The Leathersellers College was one of 6 specialist national colleges, which at that time had some 750. It was not affected by that change, but afterward, government policy did shift in favour of incorporating these monotechnics into either universities or new regional polytechnics. Fearing a weakening of the connection with the Leathersellers company, a diminution in religious status, and increased distance between industry, the governors of the college opposed this idea, but it was to no avail. An initial suggestion was that the college and the Leather Research Association would both move to a new campus and become departments of the Leeds College of Technology. The cost proved too high, however. The proposal was dead in the water by 1969, in which year the Department of Education agreed to carry on funding the college as a monotechnic for a further 5 years. At the end of that period, though, the college's future again came under discussion. The Inner London Education Authority refused to fund a move to incorporate the college into the City Polytechnic, which left only one viable option on the table: to merge the college with a leather department at Nen College, Northampton, to establish a new National College of Leather Technology there, which would also incorporate the leather from Leeds University. The Museum of Leathercraft, the Research Association, and the Trade Federation all subsequently followed the college up to Northampton. The Leathersellers were very generous once more. They found £500,000 to pay for teaching, residential, accommodation to house the new college in what was called the National Leathersellers Centre. The first students were admitted in 1977, and it was officially opened 1 year later by His Royal Highness Prince Michael of Kent, an honorary liveryman of the company. The Leathersellers continued to force education at Northampton, but the history of that department and the company's involvement, that would be the subject of another lecture altogether. Our focus must be on London, and we can see the former college building in this final slide here. And when the governors of the Leathersellers College met for the final time in July 1978, well, they brought an end to the company's 4-year-long involvement in training and education in Bermondsey. It's been a challenging and sometimes difficult experience, but the college did enjoy, and its contribution to technical education and research had been of immeasurable value. It was without doubt a noble endeavour.
Ian, thank you. That was really, really interesting. And I'm going to admit to my ignorance. I knew a lot about polytechnics. I knew virtually nothing about monotechnics before this lecture. And I found that absolutely fascinating, and the tie into the delivery company, what they did there. So we got some questions coming in. One, it kind of pushes into when you were talking about the 1960s and Harold Wilson's white heat of technology revolution speech at the Labour Party conference, and whether on reflection that had a positive or negative effect upon the monotechnics.
I suppose in many ways the monotechnics represented, they were set up after the Second World War, and so by the mid 1960s they were 20 years old. And I suppose some people would say they represented in sort of industries of yesterday. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, but what that may have been some of the chat. And are there new were there new technologies, for example, coming through that perhaps deserved greater focus? I mean, the monotechnics are clearly a good idea if there's an industry. But I suppose what nobody realised when Harrison gave the 19 when was the speech? He gave it in opposition, didn't he? In
1963 was that speech. Yeah.
63. So he won the election in 64, didn't he?
Mm.
Could anybody actually see that deindustrialization was? We can see it now, can't we? We can see the 60s and then particularly in the 70s, deindustrialization was going to be a thing. I wonder if anybody could sort of see it at the time, and the writing was on the wall for the leather industry in many ways, certainly in London. So, I mean, I suppose the simple answer to your question is for the Leathersellers College, the white heat of technology speech was meaningless. Was meaningless for all the white heat of technology. I mean, there was little investment in white heat of technology at Leathersellers College to bring perhaps the leather industry into a new age. Was it seen as old-fashioned and out of date already by that time? I don't know.
Mm. Okay. That kind of gets into a couple of other things sitting in there about the evolution of apprenticeships. I mean, I'd be loath to call them modern day apprenticeships, but apprenticeships coming alongside, were they becoming the natural replacement? And it feels like there was a thread that you were just getting into when you were talking about, the kind of lack of impact about the Harold Wilson type speech. And a separate question, and I'd like to ask the question in a deeper way about, you talk about the German model sitting, within your presentation, and I think if one looks at world exemplars of vocational education, the German model, they're highly regulated, highly driven out, hard bound into the educational cultural ecosystem in Germany. So there are two questions there. So one about the role of apprenticeships that sat in there, and then maybe some words about the German model.
I mean, apprenticeship at the moment as well, doesn't it? There are renewed discussions about the value of apprenticeships at the moment. I may just deal very quickly with the German thing, actually, because that's so. In the 1950s and 60s, there were some tanning schools in Germany, and the governors of the Leathersellers College were visiting those, and they were coming back with ideas. They were coming back saying, these are the sort of things that we should do, particularly in the mid 1960s. But instead, what they were told by the government is, well, actually, you need to merge into a regional polytechnic. You need to move to Leeds. And the idea to move to Leeds, actually, when you look at it, it's not a terrible idea. You'll have a campus, you have the research association there, you have the Leathersellers College as a branch of the polytechnic. You've got the Leeds, the leather department at Leeds University as well. Leeds could have become this, what we would now call a hub for leather technology. But the government at the time refused to consider the West, well, it would be the West German model, of course, then, and the cost for the move to Leeds proved too high. So, it's going to come as a surprise to nobody on this call, is it? There simply wasn't enough funding to make something that could have been a good idea happen. And people were looking at West Germany. They were looking at Germany in the 1880s and saying we could do technical education like them. They were looking at Germany in the 1960s. And thanks to the livery companies and the corporation in London, particularly in the 1880s, something happened. In the 1960s, I'm not so sure. Now, going back to apprenticeships, I mean, there are various reasons why apprenticeships fell into decline, not the least industrialization. You don't need to serve a 7-year apprenticeship to stand in a factory and sort of, just hammer something into place, however often you do that in a day. And, so apprenticeships sort of fell away as Britain industrialized, and livery companies lost their role to control them. And colleges, polytechnics, were seen, I think, as very much a replacement for that. You learn the skills you need. Indeed, if you look at that picture of the college being opened, at the time, you'll find newspapers reporting on it as a move to restore the value of apprenticeships. But rather than sort of 7 years with a master. It's a 2-year diploma, a 3-year diploma. It's just called something quite different, isn't it? I feel like I've gone on quite a bit there, Mark. Sorry, I drifted away from your original question.
No, no, no,
But
no, no, no. It was an open question, actually, to encourage you to kind of contextualize, if you like, the kind of role of the historical role of the Monotechnic to the
I mean,
emerging role of apprenticeship.
as part of the diploma, students were expected to spend at first a year in industry, and the best students spent their summer working in various tanneries around Bermondsey. Now that became different, but there's a real sense here that the work they did in college and the block release, I don't know, year in industry, however we want to think about that, the two things went together, and the monotechnic and the leather industry being close to each other, those glory days of the college, if you like, between say like 1930 and 1955, 1960, that's when we see that scheme working at its best. And brilliant research work coming out of the college as well.
Okay. We've got a question around future of, is there a future for institutions like this? But I want to put a personal framing around that question as well. So, I mean, we meet for the first time today, but yeah, my role, for whatever it's worth in the city, is I represent entrepreneurship. I'm the current master entrepreneur, so I'm very, very focused on enterprise economy and the city kind of remembering the crafts, the trades, the invention that came through. So in that context, what do you think, or is there a future for institutions like the Leathersellers College, and actually thinking about some kind of very contemporary modern trades that will be out there? We obviously have livery companies that are in information technologists. That will be a very obvious one, but kind of banking, finance, law, etc. The kind of, is there a place to get these colleges back in? And if there is, what do we need to do to make them work?
Well, we do have these, for example. There's the London College of Fashion. There's the MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I mean, Imperial College is known for its science, technology, maths, and everything like that. So we either have them that have the name in the title, like the London College of Fashion, or we have certain schools, or Loughborough University, for example, is well known if you want to go into sport or sports science and those kind of things. So absolutely, I think there's a place for them. Whether a rigid 3-year degree is always the best way to go, that's another question. It's rather unfortunate. I do need to be careful what I say here. Is that the leather department moved up to Northampton University, and it's been there since 1977, 1978, when it's officially opened. And it's gone through various guises. It's now the Institute of Creative Leather Technology. Well, in the last few months, Northampton University have just pulled the plug on that. Now, like I say, this is a subject of another lecture altogether, and there are discussions within the leather industry about finding a new home for it, or somehow changing the offerings so it's slightly different. So, in answer to your question, yes, I absolutely think there is a place for specialist training. Maybe some of it is shorter courses. More degree apprenticeships. I mean, degree apprenticeships. Coming back to what you were saying earlier, James Dyson, for example, is very keen on these on these sorts of ideas. Yeah, I just don't think a one size fits all model is necessarily going to be the way that they're going to work.
Mm-hmm. No, it's interesting, and thank you for something you said towards the end of that, because there was also a question around what are the leather sellers doing now? Do they still feel they're attached to the legacy of what they were doing, and is there an immediate future pathway, which you touched into towards the end of your last response? Sorry, that was like a very closed question. Apologies.
No. I mean, the leather. I mean, I'm not a leather seller, and but I know that the leather sellers and the leather livery companies have been supporting leather education. So the cordwainers and the curriers, London College of Fashion, and at Northampton, and the leather sellers and the glovers. So we all know that livery companies want to support their historic trades. I mean, it's given them a renewed sense of purpose in the 20th century. And it's finding the right ways of doing that, and the right institutions to do it through, which is the important thing. And companies have been pretty good at that for the last 100
Oh, sorry, we just lost you right at the end there.
Yeah.
Sorry, that we missed
Oh,
the last sentence.
no, no, I just said the companies have been very good at that for the last 100, 150 years.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. A couple of closing questions sitting in, which are kind of related to each other a wee bit. Um, Obviously, in a current incarnation, in terms of vocational education, we lived a lot with BTECs, and we've now got the T levels that
Yeah.
came out behind that. But I think any surface level reading will tell you that the T levels are not getting the support that people had, and student numbers are quite low, and a lot of it is actually coming down to a failure to get work placements at the back of it, as would be reported. So again, kind of interested to get your
Hmm.
kind of expert view on that.
I feel I'm answering a couple of questions on policy rather than history, but anyway, that's never
No,
stopped me
no,
before.
no.
We have
It's
these
always going to
constant
happen here.
we have these constant reinventions of technical education, don't we? The monotechnics were set up in late 1940s, and then by the 1960s, well, that's not the model anymore. We're going polytechnics. We've had HNDs, we've had BTECs, and we've had NVQs and T levels. Oh, I mean, this is just in my lifetime, and I'm not even that old. So it just feels like it's constantly being, and I get that it has to respond to the changing needs of industry and what's required. But the university sector has, and GCSEs and A levels have not had anything like that sort of churn, have they? And things aren't necessarily being given the time that they need to bed in. I do think that there is going to be an increasing number of students looking at technical education, looking at apprenticeships, because of a number of factors. University fees, things like artificial intelligence. It's going to be will affect white collar jobs rather than blue collar jobs. I think it's fair to say. So I do agree with you. I think T levels haven't quite fired the imagination of the public. But there's definitely scope for something like those, or the degree apprenticeships, for example. I mean, even right. So there are some wonderful apprenticeships in this country. There are some wonderful, wonderful apprenticeships, and some of those are in the sort of white collar Ernst and Young field, but others at places like BAE, Rolls Royce. Getting some of these apprenticeships is competitive as getting into a Russell Group university. Well, it's only recently we've actually sort of thought, well, what a streamlined process, the same way that UCAS is. There are so many sort of small tweaks that people can do to make technical education more attractive, as attractive as a university degree is. And I say this as somebody who works in universities.
Well, actually, sorry, I will cut through because we're running short on time. And there was one final question that came in, which plays to the other end of the spectrum. Should we be encouraging vocational education much more into the secondary educational scheme? And for the fear of getting back to grammar schools versus secondary
Mm,
modern schools, really don't want to go there. But
yeah.
are we doing enough at the secondary level?
My instinct is probably not. I think, I mean, everyone have their own opinions on grammars and secondary modern, things like that. I mean, personally, I think if you look at Germany, they select. Maybe 11's too young to select, but maybe the age of about 14, you've got a rough idea if you want to work with your hands or your head or something like that at that point. So maybe there's this scope at perhaps sort of key stage, well, that's key stage 4, isn't it? A key stage 4 to improve technical education in schools, or perhaps even have technical secondary schools. But I mean, I don't see anybody talking about that sort of thing
Mm.
in the sort of realm of education policy.
All right. Ian, we are literally running down to the last minute, so it just remains for me to once again say thank you for giving up the time, putting all the hard yards in to do the research on this as well, and share. Been fascinating. So thank you. Just a final trail out for the next 3 upcoming lectures, which are on the screen there. So 26th March, Green Spaces, Cultivating the Mind, Body and Soul. 28th March, we're going to be looking at engineering, and very specifically from the perspective of female engineers, which I know is a topic very close to Michael's heart. And then on 10th of April, we've got the future of the arts and humanities, just looking back over the first 25 years of the Arts and Humanities Research Council. So once again, thank you, Ian, for spending time with us. Thank you for the audience for checking in and the questions and everything else. And I guess all it remains to wish everybody a happy and hopefully dry weekend. So thank you.